Wade and Wade reacts.
We got a request to react to Freedom and Justice Gundam development history. Let's get into it.
After the successful testing of the Dreadnought Gundam and the Gwei's experimental arms type, their data would be combined to develop two of the most powerful mobile suits of the war: the ZGMF X09A Justice Gundam and the ZGMF X10A Freedom Gundam. And since both machines were designed to work in tandem with one another, they would prove to be nearly unstoppable when doing so. The most famous of the two was without a doubt the heavily armed Freedom. Other than the Lacerta beam sabers, Lupus beam rifle, and Xifios rail cannons carried over from the experimental arms type, it also featured the M100 Balena plasma beam cannons on its wings. These were not just the most powerful weapons on the Freedom, but also some of the most powerful weapons ever to be mounted on a mobile suit, period. To drive all of these weapons then, the Freedom possessed a specialized targeting system called the multi-lock-on system. This allowed pilots with high spatial awareness to target and attack multiple enemies at once. In practice, the Freedom would often use this system in combination with its so-called full burst mode, which simply meant that the Freedom was firing all of its weapons at once. But despite all of these heavy weapons, the Freedom was still a remarkably agile machine thanks to its wings. When these unfolded, the Freedom would enter something known as the High Mobility Aerial Tactics mode, or HIMAT mode for short. As the name indicates, this mode gave the machine a big boost in mobility, turning it into a deadly dogfighting machine. And despite the name, it could also be used in space, where it would act in conjunction with its ambac maneuvering. Thanks to this, the Freedom could and would present a serious threat to enemy mobile suits, even at close range.
Must be the final battle.
Gotta be.
All of this made the Freedom one of the most powerful mobile suits around, even well into the Second Bloody Valentine War. Unfortunately for Zaft, this immensely powerful machine was snatched away from them almost as soon as it was completed. To recapture it, Atheron Zala was assigned to its sister unit, the Justice Gundam, the more close combat-oriented machine of the two. As with the Freedom, many of the experimental arms types as weapons were carried over, including the Lacerta beam sabers, Lupus beam rifle, and the refined version of the Fatum 00, the Justice's main and distinguishing feature that also gave it a lot of versatility. Other than a nice variety of weapons, it allowed the Justice to go into HIMAT mode by flipping it up. This granted the Justice incredible speed as well as increased mobility, similar to how the Freedom's HIMAT mode worked. In addition to this, it could also function as a traditional subflight system, but with a few extra tricks up its sleeve. All of its weapons remained usable through remote control, and even the whole backpack itself could be remotely controlled, allowing it to fight alongside the Justice, or in the worst case scenario, it could be used to ram enemies. A weapon then that wasn't tested out on the Gwei's were the two shoulder-mounted beam boomerangs.
Have you seen those in action?
Yeah, we have.
Other than its combat role, another thing that set the Justice apart from the Freedom was the more powerful and also more prominent sensor array on its head, which was very similar to the one found on the Aegis. This most likely increased its data gathering and communication abilities, possibly hinting that this one would serve as the commander unit of the two. Also, just like the Freedom Gundam, the Justice did come with the multi-lock-on system, but Atheron would never use it with just the Justice Gundam. More about that in a second. Now, unfortunately for Zaft, they also lost this machine when Atherin decided to defect rather than carry out his mission. But things didn't end here. To support the twins, Zaft also developed a purpose-built carrier, the Eternal. As just a warship, it was armed relatively lightly with a single main gun, 2 double railguns, and then a plethora of missile launchers, small beam guns, and sea-whiz guns, but it more than made up for this in 2 ways. One, it was Zaft's fastest ship, even beating out the high-speed Nazca class. And 2, of course, was its mobile suit complement and the special facilities designed to maintain and resupply them. This also included 2 special housings on the hull for 2 mobile suit embedded tactical enforcers, or meteors for short. These were weapon modules designed to dock with the Justice and Freedom Gundam, but when stored on the Eternal, they could also function as turrets, significantly increasing its firepower. Now, technically, it should be possible for non-nuclear powered mobile suits to also use these things, since they did have onboard batteries, but they were designed to also draw power from a nuclear-powered Gundam, so it's very possible that the battery itself didn't last long. This would later on be rectified with Meteor Unit 5 and 6 by the Junk Guild, who retrofitted them with a nuclear reactor each and an N-jammer canceller each. And this was probably very necessary to power all of the weapons on this thing.
I was wondering about the parasource
We have a whopping 77 60 centimeters Erinakaeus anti-ship missile launchers, 2 93.7 centimeter high energy beam cannons, 2 120 centimeter high energy beam cannons, and 2 MAX-200 beam swords.
That's crazy.
If there was anything before that the Justice and Freedom Gundam couldn't take on, they sure could now.
For sure.
And other than weaponry, the Meteor units also boosted their speed with engines designed after those of the Jin High maneuver type. And because of this speed, the Meteor was also later developed into the Vern 35A MPFM multi-purpose flight module, which was essentially a stripped down and streamlined version of the Meteor that acted as a booster for things like mobile suits, shuttles, and even fighter planes were being considered
it was multi-purpose.
Originally, it didn't have any weapons, but some were later retrofitted by the Jung Guild. Also, originally this thing was going to be called the Meteor Kai. But back to the Eternal now. Unfortunately for Zaft, they would never get to use this as it was, again, stolen shortly after being completed.
They need better security.
Yeah, they do. Whoever's on security now needs to be fired immediately.
すごいなあの子。いいのか？お前の婚約者だろ？
元ね。
At some point after the completion of the Freedom and the Justice then, Zaft would begin research on their upgraded forms, called the Strike Freedom and Infinite Justice respectively. But again, unfortunately for Zaft, they would never get to use them because at some point during development, or shortly after completion, they were stolen by Decline Faction again. Although considering how
neither side has
were
good security.
fine-tuned to the
There's like a trope for
operational
this
preferences
series at
of
this
the
point.
pilots who stole the original units, I feel that it's safe to assume that they were acquired at some point during development, and that they were then later finished by Decline Faction. The Strike Freedom continued the heavy artillery role of the Freedom by having upgrades of the previous weapons like the more compact and more powerful Xifios 3 railguns, 2 MAM-21KF high-energy beam rifles, which could be either used individually or linked together for a more powerful long-range beam, and instead of the 2 wing-mounted plasma cannons, it now had a single Kalidus multi-phase beam cannon installed on its abdomen. In the wings then,
powerful.
it now had 8 Dragoon pods controlled by the new Super Dragoon system. The big difference with the regular Dragoon system was that they no longer needed a pilot with high spatial awareness to use them. But despite this, it was claimed that they could only be used to their full effect by the so-called Ultimate Coordinator Kira Yamato, a claim that can most likely be disregarded as mere propaganda by Decline Faction, who was operating this machine. But putting that aside, the Dragoons had a beam assault cannon each and could also emit a beam blade.
Dang.
They need better weapons.
Yeah, they do.
Or at least a smaller defense force.
But despite their power, they did cause an issue with another system present on the Strike Freedom, the Voiture Lumière system. This system was mounted behind the Dragoons on the wings and granted the Freedom superior acceleration and agility. Because of the way it worked, the wings emitted light when the system was active, an effect affectionately known as the wings of the skies. While the Strike Freedom can use this system while the Dragoons are docked by slightly extending them, the system can only operate at full strength when they're launched. Which makes you wonder why the Strike Freedom launched with them equipped during battles on Earth. The Dragoons could only be used in space, and unlike those of the Providence and the Legend Gundam, they seem to have no special features so that they could be used when docked. At least, not that we saw. Regardless, when using all of these weapons together, the Strike Freedom would enter the so-called full burst mode, which would again be aided by the multi-lock-on system carried over from the regular Freedom. Another system that was carried over was the high mat mode, where the Strike Freedom unfolds its wings for better agility and aerial maneuverability. And what increased this already phenomenal agility even more was a new armor splitting system. While it did somewhat lower the unit's defensive capabilities, this was mitigated by installing phase shift armor on the exposed joints and by installing powerful beam shields on the forearms. And finally, the Strike Freedom could of course also dock with the Meteor units in case it needed even more firepower. The Infinite Justice then can be much more easily summed up. It's the Justice Gundam, but everything is better. Or in other words, by taking the combat data of the original Justice into account, the Infinite Justice was turned into the best close combat machine they could, something that was greatly reflected by its weapons. Not only did it come with standard beam sabers that could be combined into a beam staff, but it also had an MRQ-15A Griffin beam blade on each leg, inspired by the foot-mounted beam blades of the Aegis, and the MX-2002 carrier beam shield, a shield that could not only emit a beam field, but also featured a grappling hook,
got turned into a melee
the
monster.
grapple stinger, and the RQM-55 Shining Edge beam boomerang. And the same went for the Fatum 01. Thanks to the one Super Lacerta beam saber mounted on its nose, the pre-phase Lacerta beam saber mounted behind each of the Hyperfortis beam cannons, and the Griffin 2 beam blades mounted on each wings, the backpack no longer had to rely on just ramming enemy units, it could now instead slice them up, also giving the backpack a higher chance of making it back to the Infinite Justice in one piece. And in addition to all of these beam blades, it also featured two MA6J Hyperfortis beam cannons because it still needed some ranged weaponry. On the Justice itself then, we can find a pair of MMI GAU-26 17.5 twin Seawiz guns on the head, a pair of MMI M19L 14mm twin Seawiz guns on the chest, and finally a MAM-1911 high-energy beam rifle that can also be stored on the back skirt. What also greatly improved its close combat performance was the same armor-splitting technology as the Strike Freedom. And just as with that machine, phase shift armor was now installed on the joints to increase their defensive capabilities. And then finally, as with the original Justice, it had the multi-lock-on system, which was only necessary when docked with the Meteor unit, which it of course could and would still do. And before I wrap up this video, a quick fun fact about the Strike Freedom and the Infinite Justice. Did you know that they were originally going to be called the Super Freedom and the Night Justice respectively? Let me know down below which name you prefer.
Shout out to Kakarot with this video. This is a pretty good video breaking down the different Gundams from Seed. I like the creators have felt like they just said for the upgrades, the final upgrades, we're just gonna put everything on the mobile suits. It's kind of like when you're building a character on a video on an RPG, just trying to make them the jack of all trades. You want the most powerful armor, the most powerful spells, and the most powerful melee weapons.
That was definitely what they did. They made the Strike Freedom, or what is it called now? The Mighty Strike Freedom and Infinite Justice almost unstoppable. They have a weapon for every occasion. They have firepower that they need and some to spare. They have weapons that they can just pull out if they decide to have fun on the battlefield. And we saw that in some of the clips we reacted to from the Gundam Seed Destiny movie. Was it called Gundam Seed Freedom or something like that?
I can't remember exactly what it was called.
But we saw how unstoppable the upgraded versions of those Gundams were in that film. I mean, they could not be stopped. Even the destroyed Gundams were fodder compared to the upgraded Justice and the Strike.
Yeah, it's some powerful suits. And then another thing too, I know that the fans said that they told us in the comments that there was a new Seed series coming out. It was supposed to take place before the movie. So for the fans of Seed, is that still coming out? Because I haven't heard any news about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would like to know the same. Kakarot asked at the end of his video, which name did you prefer? The name that they chose first or the official names of the Gundams? I like the official names of the Gundams better.
Yeah, they made the right decision by changing the name.
Because I think the Justice's name was Night Justice, and the Freedom, I forgot what name they gave for that one. But yeah, you're right, they made the right decision. That does it for our reaction to this subscriber request. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comment section. Also, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you'll never miss a video from Wade and Wade Reacts.
And we're out of here.
Peace.